Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Judd Hendricks. I'm the Executive Director of Interfaith Paths to Peace, and I want to welcome you to our weekly Tuesday at 12 o'clock program on cultivating a soul-centric city. We're offering some really great conversations around how do we cultivate a developmental path from cradle to grave that is a holistic path. What are the resources in Louisville? Who's doing what? We're going to be looking at that the first year, and then the second year we're going to be actually co-creating some elements that need to be part of our community path of helping people be whole. So thanks for joining in the conversation. Each month we take a different life stage, and for the month of May we are looking at teenagers, young adults, and the different resources that we have in order to cultivate their development. And I'm really excited about this topic. I think it's one of the most interesting and maybe important topics when we look at teenage development. And that's specifically how do we cultivate and reimagine rituals and rites of passage for teenagers? One of the reasons I was interested in this is one of the dynamics that I think we struggle with as we move from as people move out of historical and cultural traditions and religious practices. How do we carry forward the importance of rites of passage and rituals that are so important in young adults' development, helping them feel a sense of belonging, helping them know where they came from, but also a sense of who they are becoming, and the opportunity to be encouraged to take on adult responsibilities and adult roles. We have a really exciting panel with a lot of experts that are doing some really amazing work in that area. And so I'm going to introduce them. They come from both religious and cultural traditions. They're going to share about some of their rites of passage and rituals that come from their traditions. One of the things that I hope we will do during this conversation is listen for common threads. What are the threads that connect these different practices across traditions, across religious communities, so that maybe we can help reimagine some cultural rites of passage for teenagers in Louisville? What would it look like to have a Louisville rite of passage that integrates all of our different traditions? It's not opposed to those, but included in those. Every teenager could know that we see them, they belong to us, and we're inviting them to take place as adults in our community. What would it look like if we created a Louisville rite of passage that could honor all of our diversity and complexity? Isn't that a beautiful vision? I just kind of came to me like, maybe that's what we can create by the end of our conversation. So thanks for joining us today. I'm going to jump in and ask them to introduce themselves basically, and then we'll get into some of the specifics of the rituals and rites of passage. I first want to ask Kristen and Claude to introduce themselves. They're working on what I think is just an amazing project of creating rituals and rites of passage. Kristen, could you start by introducing yourself and a little bit about the work you do, and then I'll have Claude jump in. Kristen, thanks for being on the program. This is twice in the last month that I've had you on, so thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's such an honor. So yeah, like Judd said, I'm Kristen Williams. I'm the Executive Director for Play Cousins Collective. And Play Cousins Collective is an African-American family collective that is building a village around our children. We do that through family and children's programming and resource sharing. And what that looks like is several little villages based off the age of your child. And we come together from birth, when parents become pregnant, and then all the way up into the teen years. We have the coming of age parent group where parents of teens connect and talk about how to support their children through each life stage. And so that's why this work that we're doing with Bernheim Forest and Bridge Kids International fits perfectly. So while we are engaging the parents, their constant concern is how do I need more. It's not just me. I can't do it alone. I need a village to bring this child into adulthood, right? And so it's so beautiful to say we have the Louisville Rites of Passage program. And that is where we engage Black youth ages 13 to 19. While they transition to adulthood, we use 4 domains of heritage, community, land, and self-determination. And so they're acquiring these skills, this knowledge, and really this really deep and cultural connection to one another, to themselves, to their history, and to the land. We thought that was such a beautiful opportunity to connect with Bernheim, to get into these natural spaces, to connect wherever they are. There is a story to the land where you're standing, right? And so often youth feel as though they've just appeared. You know, they're not connected to the generation before them or after them. They don't know the history of where they are. And so this disconnect creates tons of problems, which I'm sure we'll talk about today. And so we've come together to try to solve some of those issues. Thank you.
Kristen, thanks so much. I look forward to asking some more particular questions about that. And Claude, thank you for being a part of this partnership that you all are doing, this reclaiming of the land, and including that in our rituals and rites of passage is so important. Claude, thanks for being on, and introduce yourself. Claude, you're still on mute there.
You would think by now I would have learned. I haven't. My name is Claude Stevens. I'm the facilitator of outreach and regenerative design at Bernheim. And I am also the director of the Children at Play Network. So I began working with Kristen years and years ago at this point in time. And Bernheim has, our vision's founder was that we would be for everybody. So Isaac W. Bernheim, who founded Bernheim, said that Bernheim would be a place for you, regardless of your race, creed, or economic status. And it occurred to us about 8 or 10 years ago that Bernheim is not just a place, it's a philosophy. And a philosophy can go anywhere that it needs to go. A place is a place, it's got borders. And so we wanted to open the doors more broadly than we have in the past. I can see my role as someone that holds the door open for the people to come into the place, but also the philosophy. And so, you know, we began through play and going into our communities and helping all people figure out that one of the best places to begin connecting with nature was through play in the earliest stages, and especially through free play in the outdoors. And some of the people on the call here today help us do that. Red Dust is one of those people. So that led to other relationships, and relationships are slow and messy and necessary. And so we developed that relationship with Play Cousins Collective and with Bridge Kids International. And through that conversation that happens in relationship, we figured out that there are opportunities for us to work together to bring youth into more, you know, connection with their natural world, wherever that is. Nature is everywhere. It's not just out here at Bernheim. And the Rites of Passage program became an opportunity. And so many rites of passages include connections with nature and removal into nature and exploration of the wild. And so we thought that would be a good opportunity to work together to figure out ways where we could cherish a person's journey forward in time and become an adult in our community. So.
Thank you, Claude. And I'll look forward to hearing some of the details. And I know you all are kind of in the middle of experimenting with what all this is going to look like. So thanks for being with us in the midst of experimenting. I want to also now invite Aaron Frazee. Aaron is with the Youth and Young Adult Department with the Archdiocese of Louisville and has done a lot of work with preparing children and youth in the catechism and the understanding of development that comes out of the Catholic tradition, which is so rich. When I've studied rituals and looking at different ways in which different traditions have done rituals, and I always am so appreciative of the Catholic Church and the pedagogy of forming young people into humans. And so, Aaron, thanks for the work you've been doing in that. Introduce yourself some more, and thanks for being on.
Sure, thanks, Judd. So yeah, my name is Aaron Frazee. I'm the Associate Director of the Office of Youth and Young Adults. I just joined the diocesan staff in late June of last year. And before that, I was a parish youth leader, parish youth minister for 17 years at St. Michael's out in J-Town. So my area, for lack of a better term, of expertise really is high school students and young adults. So 18 to 35, 40 years old. That is basically where I've been living for about 2 decades of my life, trying to walk with young people and help to form disciples of Christ as we walk together, is what our focus is. Our office not only provides resources for our youth leaders and our volunteers who are helping to do that with young people, to walk them through that difficult stage of life, but also to provide opportunities for them to serve, to grow, and to learn how to be better leaders and better examples within their faith.
Thanks, Aaron, and look forward to hearing some more about the process that you all use, I think, which is a beautiful how all of the rituals and rites of passages kind of flow together, and hearing more details about that. Thanks for being on. And Ariane Barry Stern is with us. She is with the Jewish community, and Ariane has been on a panel that we did of artists envisioning the new Louisville. And so, Ariane, welcome. Thanks for being on, and introduce yourself a little bit more. Thanks for being back with Interfaith Path to Peace.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I'm just so in awe of all the work all y'all are doing. I want to hear more about that. It sounds so amazing. But yeah, I work with Knesset Israel congregation. My husband, who's on the call here, is the rabbi of that congregation. So that's sort of one of the hats that I wear in the community, in thinking about how to engage all people of all ages. I also teach in the preschool. So that's ritual with a little bit younger kids. And I teach in the Hebrew school with older students who are, our big teenage rite of passage is the bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. And I'm with kids about 1.5 years before that point. So at the phase where they're kind of starting to think about it and get stressed out about it, that's when I get the pleasure of hanging out with them. My main background is in theater, actually, more so than education. And I think where that plays into this conversation is taking a more experiential approach to learning. Is very in my bones.
Thanks, Ariane. So good to have you on. Look forward to hearing more about those rituals. I am kind of standing, and I'll be talking a little bit about the Protestant. I was was ordained a Presbyterian minister, and I grew up in the Baptist church, and so I will try to bring in the Protestant worldview. I'll also kind of become a secular humanist, so I'm also going to try to reflect on some rites of passage that we created for our children outside of our faith tradition, just to help them become adults. And I'll share a little bit about some of those rituals and rites of passages that we did for our kids when they were 13 and 16. I'm going to talk some about the need for, in our culture, a ritual when children turn 16 and get car keys. I think that is a prime time where we collectively need to create a ritual to help them become to hand over the car keys. And so I'm going to share a ritual that we did around with our children when we gave them car keys, because I think that's an important time and to recognize. Let's jump back. Kristen, I want to jump back and hear more about a little bit about why you all what was going on that you were concerned about creating rites of passage? Like what was the need you were seeing there? And then also how you brought in the Afrocentric culture, or how are those, yeah, just tell us a little bit more about the process and why you felt like rites of passage were really important, and help us understand the thinking behind that a little bit more.
I think that within our community, Black families and Black people as a whole are constantly looking for or having to create identity outside of the given narrative. And unfortunately, the given narrative for Black people is often stereotypical. It leads to the prison pipeline. So it's making someone money, but it's hurting us, right? For me to identify as a criminal, or, there's all kinds of sexual deviance, the sidekick or the comic relief. None of those are serving our children very well, but often they're brought up with that understanding of when they look in the mirror, that's who they're looking at, right? And it's on us as parents, that's why we formed Play Cousins, because we want this alternate reality for our children to grow up in, where everywhere they look, they're seeing positive images of Blackness. When they go to the doctor, we have a directory of pediatricians. So when my child goes to the doctor, they see a Black doctor. So they normalize Black people being doctors, right? And so it takes an intense amount of work to create that alternate reality. Play Cousins takes the bulk of that work for families. But we did not have a rites of passage program, and we understood that to be integral to the experience that we're trying to create for our children. Because we know that, first of all, we know that when our child's bodies change to when they change to be 7, when they hit 7, they're no longer as cute to the teachers, right? Certainly to police officers. The way that they're engaged, when you talk about the adultification of Black children, that's an intense and quick shift that a lot of our children don't understand. But then, when they actually do begin to transfer into adulthood, we have to be right there with them to explain the world that they're living in. And there's layers to that. So it's beyond what is it being an adult, but right, where are we? What is this political system that we're under, right? And how do I survive? And not only survive, but thrive, right? So we knew that it was necessary. It was not really a question of there was no question, it's just like, how soon can we do this? We know that we need it. We know that our ancestors have called for it. And it's our work to practice Sankofa, which means to go back and get it, right? So the knowledge is there. We're not creating anything new. We're trying to access that ancestral knowledge, build on it with the tools that we have to create further liberation.
That is so well said. I wish I could just record that. And well, we did record it, so it's all good. Yeah. But I appreciate the, unless we give children another narrative that connects to the depth of their history and traditions, they will buy into a consumeristic, volatile, militaristic, individualistic narrative, because that is the narrative that surrounds them. And as Black children, there's a whole different narrative of whiteness that will surround them. So I love the way you talk about connecting that to helping them redefine another narrative for their lives. And I think that narrative, knowing they belong, knowing who they are as blessed and good just as they are, and what does it mean to come into that in a unique way. So thanks for bringing in the words of narrative. I may want to come back to that, or maybe some of our other panelists can reflect on that as well. Claude, I would love to hear how you all are bringing in nature. Why is it that you think nature is so important in these rituals or rites of passage? I just want to say, I was really excited. I watched this movie, I think it's out now, called The Norseman. It's this Viking movie, but they have this scene in this movie, it's a rites of passage when this young boy, I think he's probably 9 or 10, he's coming into being included in the clan. And they have this scene where they go into this cave. It's all out in nature. They go into this cave, and his father is leading him through this cave, and they're acting like wolves. So they're acting like these animals, and they get into the center of this cave, and they have all these crazy rituals that are very, for me, kind of disturbing. But I loved the way in which they brought in nature, animals into this sense of what it means to be human, specifically in that tribe. And I went back and looked, and there's some actual anthropological work that they've done to make that rites of passage authentic to that context and culture. Anyway, Claude, that brings in the nature element. Can you share more about what you all are doing and how you're using Bernheim property for that?
Did it again. Yes, well, I'd like to take a big leap back in time. I think that as a species, we have just progressively separated ourselves from nature. So as we move forward in time, we talk about nature as being something that is different than we are, that here we are and over there is nature. And then there's another piece of this, and that is that gradually through time, I think that we as a species have an affinity for ritual. And so ritual develops, and then our separateness from nature develops. And then we are given permission, sometimes through religion, to think that we have dominion over all of that. In fact, that's even part of some religious texts, that here you are, special organism, you have dominion over things that you do not have dominion over. And so one aspect of all of this work for me is to reconnect us to what we are already connected to, and that is that we are nature, and that we are organisms in community with other organisms. And then in terms of that ritual, in the absence of really good, compelling, healthy ritual establishes itself. So, you take any group of people, and if you don't provide healthy, organized, thoughtful ritual, they will create their own ritual. And it may not be the ritual that embraces the health of the whole community. And so the work that we're doing with Kristen and with Stacy Bailey and Nadia at Bridge Kids International, and lots of people in the community. In fact, I'd love to bring in everybody on this call. Our role is to reestablish rituals that are really ancient. So, there's this whole process of moving from being a young person to an adult in the modern age is difficult. How do you navigate that? Well, it takes some guides and some opportunities and some ritual that allows them to feel like they're moving from one point in time to another point in time. But the real impetus is on the rest of the community that then embraces that. So, you remove youth from, to go through this ritual. And then there's this liminality period where you're neither young nor adult. And then there's some kind of a ritual. And then the big important piece of that is then the community needs to see that young person as an adult, to give them, to see them as a person with value to the entire community, as the next leader, as the next ancestor for that community. And so I am just so thankful that I get to work with thoughtful people like Kristen and the other people on the team of the Louisville Rites of Passage to try to build some ritual almost in the absence of ritual, especially in certain communities in Louisville. Nature is just a piece of that, but to me, it's the biggest piece of that because I don't see any separation between me and anything out there in the natural world. So building a way for young people to reconnect with that naturalness of who we are is kind of the piece of it for the Bernheim piece of this triad of partners.
Thank you, Claude. And we may have some questions, more questions for you all about the particularities of that. But thank you for also opening up. Boy, it wouldn't be great to have Bernheim as a kind of a ritual spot for all of our different faith communities and secular communities. So thanks for that invitation, Claude. That we'll see how we can take you up on that. Aaron, jump back in and talk to us some about the confirmation process and maybe how some of the rituals kind of, if you can go back to like baptism, and then there's first communion, there's some different other pieces in the ritual of the Catholic Church that confirmation kind of hangs on. So if you could go back, not just talk about that process, but what is the ritual process and how does that all kind of work together logically? Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah, so Judd, I think you hit the nail on the head right there with that. So confirmation, which is kind of the big teenage sacrament, locally we do it, we have parishes doing it from 5th grade to 11th grade. There's not in our diocese, there's not a mandate of it has to be done at this age, right? So most young people who are coming through the church, they're usually baptized as infants, doing away with original sin, all that good stuff. So we have water and holy oil that's anointed with the young person for baptism. So that's the first of our sacraments of initiation, right? It kind of kicks everything off. It's continued on with First Holy Communion, first time about 2nd grade usually. Here locally is where young people take communion for the first time, and it's that second step in the kind of process of the rites of initiation. And the third one is confirmation, which is what most people think of as the teenage sacrament, for lack of a better term. And this is for folks obviously who have been a part of the church their whole life. For folks who come in, there's a separate process called RCIT, or the Rite of Christian Initiation for Teens. So they actually, in whatever year it is, they would do all of these at one time at the Easter Vigil. So they would do all of these rites of initiation together. But for folks who are brought up within the faith, those rites are kind of spread out amongst things. With confirmation, most people think of it as the young adult's choice to be a part of the church, and that's a big misconception. It is not. It's actually the sacrament that really kind of seals in what was started at baptism. So it's a continuation of what happened at baptism versus it being the young person's choice, which is why you see it being from 5th grade all the way through 11th or 12th grade in our diocese. And as far as kind of rituals go with the church, those are kind of the official ones for the teenage years. Really, is confirmation is the biggest one that most folks think of. But we're Catholic. We like to do a lot of things that a blessing of things. So Judd, you mentioned keys. At parishes, we have some parishes, and again, it's across the board because everybody kind of does their own thing. But we have folks that do blessings of keys or blessings of licenses in young people as they get ready to go off, right? Kind of creating a ritual with that stage of life. The blessing of graduates as they get ready to go from 8th grade to high school, or from high school into college. We do things subculturally, within the Catholic schools, which I'm not from here. I'm from just south of Buffalo, so some things kind of mystify me. But the turning of rings with ring ceremonies at the Catholic high schools, I never heard of that until I got here. And then programmatically, we have some things that they're kind of rites of passage, but not within certain communities a lot of times. So we have things like the Christian Leadership Institute for young people that helps them to learn what leadership skills are within our Office of Multicultural Ministry. They do things like Encuentro for our Hispanic and Latinx community. For our Black community, we have Kajinga. So there are kind of subcultures and they're not really rites of passages, but things that focus on helping young people to grow within that teenage age group.
Aaron, one of the, knowing a lot of Catholic folks here in Louisville and talking to them about meaningful moments, often I hear there's like a senior retreat that a lot of our Catholic churches do, or a lot of like Catholic schools do. And they go
Yes.
on this retreat and they have parents write them a letter. I think that, but I hear a lot of times when I talk to people, they reflect back about this weekend that they spent away, and they all get together and cry, and but they read these letters. But that's kind of one of those non-official rituals that seems like it's been really powerful.
Yeah, that the retreat you're referring to is called the Christian Awakening Retreat, and a lot of our Catholic schools do it senior year. St. X does it junior year, but yeah, it really is kind of meant to be an awakening of their faith, trying to like give them a little boost to get them moving within their faith life. I went on it as a public school kid in Indiana and loved it, but it's definitely one of those moments I think for a lot of folks that is kind of pivotal in their life. And those retreat letters, which are a secret, Judd, you're not supposed to tell everybody.
We'll go back and bleep that out.
That's right. No, it's fine. But those letters, are a way to connect with their parents, and it's really powerful to hear. A lot of places will read aloud either mom or dad's letter to that young person while the group is gathered, and that's a really powerful moment. Because as we know, teenagers don't always think of their parents as their best friends, although this generation has moved more towards that. But maybe that parent that they don't have a great relationship with, to hear that they love them, to hear that they pray for them every day, is very powerful and very moving.
Yeah, thank you. And so there's some elements that I'm really aware of in these specifically rites of passage, where there's a role for the parent, but then there's also a role of the larger community to be with young people in the liminal space. And I don't know, Claude, if you use that word, but that liminal space between moving from the home and moving into the culture, that these communities need to fill that role. And so I really appreciate in creating these rites of passage, the role of parent, but also the role of mentor and community to be involved in that. It feels like the Catholic Church has really done a good well of echoing home, church, and culture. And I'm sure that's easier to do in Louisville since it's a strong Catholic church. Anyway, Ariane, let's get to you, because I want to get these kind of rituals all together, and then let's just have some conversation about what's coming up for us and in the creating of meaningful ritual. Ariane, talk some more about the bar mitzvah and the bat mitzvah and the different ways. Again, I also, Ariane, it's helpful for me because I think a lot of times people see our Jewish community as this monolithic community. I don't think people understand the diversity of expression of the Jewish religious paths, with the different types of Orthodox or conservative or and I don't know how much that plays out in the different ways the bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah is celebrated. But if you could help us reflect on that a little bit too, for me, it fills out the Jewish religious faith, because it gets a little monolithic, I think, for Christians or other folks that are looking at that. So could you reflect on that a little bit too?
Yeah, definitely. But I want to first say, I think what's really striking me listening to all y'all talk is the amount of innovative ritual you're all participating in is really very beautiful. And I'm hearing a lot of looking at, well, what are teenagers already experiencing in the world, and what are they going through, and how can we create space and ritual that encompasses those things and that's relevant. And I think that with Judaism, it very much started out as a religion based around innovative ritual and very radical ritual. And somewhere in time, those rituals got codified to some extent, and innovation stagnated. And I think a lot of the work we're trying to do now is how can we get back to a place where we're innovating and thinking about, well, why did we have this ritual in the first place? And is what we're doing still working? And so I can sort of go into that more, but I think I'm learning a lot from seeing that y'all are already doing the work that we're working on, that we're trying to accomplish. So our sort of teenage rite of passage would be a bar mitzvah for a boy or a bat mitzvah for a girl. I will refer to it as a B mitzvah A, because it's just more succinct, and B, it's more gender inclusive. So you'll hear me say bar mitzvah a lot. It happens at 12 or 13 typically. And it, just to answer your question, Judd, in more orthodox, more traditional forms of Judaism, girls would not have this ritual. There would only be a bar mitzvah, because they look at the roles that men and women take on in the religion differently. We are in the conservative denomination, which does not mean conservative the way that we think of it. And our movement is an entirely egalitarian movement. So regardless of gender, everybody goes through the same process. But that does differ depending on your denomination of Judaism. And what's interesting about this ritual is that it didn't start out as a ritual at all. Your bar mitzvah is the age at which you are obligated in the commandments as a Jewish person. So when you're 12, you don't have to pray and you don't have to read the Torah, and you can play and have fun. And then you get to be this age, and now you're responsible for doing all of the things that adults are responsible for doing. So it is really your moment of stepping up to the plate and saying, I'm now my own member of this community. I don't belong to my parents, but I'm a person and I'm responsible for who I represent in this community. The ritual part of it sort of came after. And what is typically done is you exemplify that you can do these things that you are now allowed to do. So they will read from the Torah using the cantillation or trope that we read from. They will lead a part of the prayer service. They will give a sermon, and then they get to have a party. There is often a community service component of this also, but the reading from the Torah and leading the service is sort of the most typical thing that you'll see done. And again, that comes from this idea that, well, you can do these things now, so you're going to demonstrate that you can do it. And originally, that would be your first time doing those things, with the expectation that you're going to keep doing it because now you're a member of this community and that's how you contribute. What ends up happening now is it's sort of something that people check off of a box. They're like, okay, my child's going to have a bar mitzvah and they're going to read from the Torah, and then like they never have to do it again. It's okay. They're done. And it isn't this taking your place in the community that it was originally intended to be. And it's somewhat uniform. There's somewhat of a rubric for it, and that rubric doesn't always take into account different kinds of learners. My husband is reacting. And different children and what is best for them. I mean, of course, there's children with various learning disabilities for whom reading out loud can be hard, or children with stage fright, right? For whom this can actually be a traumatic experience, one that really distances them from the community and from their religion. But there's also just, we're not asking them, what do you have to offer our community? What are the hard questions of really like, so we will talk about the difference of having a bar mitzvah and becoming a bar mitzvah. Right now, people have bar mitzvahs. It is an event and it's a party and you finish it. Whereas traditionally, the idea is you become a bar mitzvah. Whether you have the party and the ritual has nothing to do with it. It is a change in status that we view. And so where we're sort of going with the more innovative ritual is starting to ask kids, who are you? What's important to you? What do you like doing? And then creating a ritual that actually shows how can you, as the full human that you are, contribute to our community? What is the place for you in this community? Not asking them to fit into a place that we've decided to designate in a little box for them. So that could look like saying, okay, you really love painting. Maybe for your bar mitzvah, you're going to teach a painting class to the seniors in our community. Or you like playing with little kids. So maybe instead of reading Torah, you're going to contribute to our community by once a month offering to babysit the kids during our prayer service so that their parents can go pray, right? What do you have to offer? And how can you incorporate Judaism into the adult that you are becoming in the world?
Ariane, that is so beautiful. Thank you for bringing in this and helping us see the creative reimagining of these rituals to bring in the lives and the experiences of children and specifically. I just love the way you all are conceptualizing in the Mitzvah now will be the term that I use. Thanks for helping us with language, which is so important. At this point, I've got so many things going through my head. I do want to share from kind of a secular humanist perspective, a ritual that we did with our kids. One, when they were 13, when they turned 13, we created a walking path. I took a bowl and for my oldest and wrote a poem around this bowl, and then I shattered the bowl. And we took a walking path. There's a walking path that goes along Frankfurt Avenue, goes down by the creek, or it goes by the interstate. Actually, it's I forget the name of the waterway that it goes by, but it goes close to the park. But we lined up, we invited people in to meet our son along the path with a different piece of this broken bowl, starting with his grandparents that walked him from our house. So we started generationally, and then Lori and I, his mother, met them at one point and walked with them a little further to the edge of the path. And then along the narrative of their lives, we had people stationed, and he held a candle, and they all had a piece of this bowl. And so as he walked, then we would walk behind him, and he would meet these people that had been meaningful in his life, and they all gave him a piece of this broken bowl. And then at the end of the path, we all gathered there and had kind of a ritual of seeing and affirming him, but also letting him know that he was different. That he was no longer just a child, he was an adult. And that meant we were going to expect different things from him. We were going to see him a little bit differently. And then one of his activities was to reconstruct this bowl, this wholeness, this image of wholeness out of all of these other people who had been meaningful people in his life. When our kids turned 16, we kidnapped them. We set them up, and my son was in the park, and we had a bunch of adults that were drivers that had license, and we kidnapped them and blindfolded them. And then we walked him through the park and went down to the little lake on the corner of Grinstead and Lexington. And he was blindfolded, and we had different adults kind of lead him down, talking about, what does it mean to get car keys, and telling stories about, things that had happened in cars for us as young adults, because it's a huge transition. And then we got down, and I took the car keys and I put a light in a milk jug, and I took the car keys and I threw it out into the middle of the lake, and he had to wade out and swim out into the lake to get the car keys in the milk jug in order to be able to drive. So there was this like, okay, if you want to drive, that's fine, but you gotta, you gotta step up. So we were trying to find these rituals, but it included nature, Claudia, and all of these. Nature was really important because I think that's an element. So anyway, those are some secular humanist kind of rituals, but it's that creative thinking of community, parents, the things that we do, the symbols that we use, and helping people understand themselves and grow. So I wanted to share those rituals that we created. I want to open this up. This is some really good juice. So what's coming up for you? I'd love to bring in some of our panel, some of the folks that have joined us online. What's come up for you as you've heard our panelists speak about rituals, and maybe you can share a meaningful ritual in your life as well. Let's just open it up and have some conversation. Anybody unmute themselves and jump in. Red, what's coming up for you? I always love to hear your thoughts. Is anything coming up for you, Red, if you would mind jumping in?
Yeah, sure. I don't mind. I wasn't prepared with anything, but I'm just enjoying listening to this conversation and hearing the kind of percolating and weaving of different perspectives and traditions together. And I guess Kristen and Claude already know this about me, but I kind of come from a nature-based regenerative rites of passage background. So I'm very, I enjoyed listening to your designed rituals for the your rites of passage for your kids as they were becoming adults. Um, I do believe that the natural world is endlessly regenerative, and I'm interested in Kristen, the way you said uh, going back to get it. Our ancestors still moving and speaking through us through our time. Um, I know a lot of us come from different traditions that sometimes have a severance or a break at some point in their history. And I believe that a lot of us now are looking anew and seeking how do we turn back to the natural world and look to ourselves and to our own ancestry to find what new ceremonies and rituals that are cohesive with these times want to emerge and populate the world and interweave. So I don't have anything to add, just some reflections on that process. And I love knowing that this conversation's happening in Louisville.
Thanks, Fred. Thanks for joining in on it. How about some of our other folks that are joining us on Zoom? Love to hear your thoughts, what's emerging for you, or any of the panelists, if anything's coming up for you that you would love to just echo or you haven't shared. Japa, can you join in the convo?
Yeah, and the reason I joined the call today, because as an educator, I just wanted to speak a little bit about how educators can be a part of this. And especially as a Waldorf teacher, we actually incorporate a lot of rites of passage in our curriculum. For example, every Waldorf teacher has to write a verse every year for each of their children, which from the previous, because we stay with our same group of children for 5 to 8 years. So in the coming year, based on my work with the child, I write a verse that sort of speaks to me about who the child is becoming. And then on the birthdays, we call them birthday verses, and each child every during the week, on the day of the week they were born, stands up and learns to recite their verse for the whole class. So every week, everybody recites their verse. But then on the birthday in that year, each child, then there's a ritual which is put together, which is developmentally appropriate to reflect where they are in their relationships with each other and the community. Another aspect that I brought into it, every year I took the children on a camping trip that got more and more responsibility for them. Like the first camping trip was in the 3rd grade, and it was just like an overnight kind of farming sort of thing. But then it's a 3-day trip. By the time they get to 5th and 6th grade, it's like a whole week, and we're going like following the Lewis and Clark Trail or following the Native American mounds, but basically trying to give children a relationship with the land and the history of humans on the land as also a way of bringing them, helping them with transitions. So I think that for educators, we need to take that up more. I mean, Waldorf is really integrated into the curriculum, but I think in general, I think in education, there should be some awareness of the development of the personality of the human being, not just their cognitive capacities. And we should make some effort to participate in those transitions.
Thank you, Japa. It's always so appreciative of, there's this the priestly role that we all have, or the archetype of the priestly role, and that manifests in our traditions differently. But I think there are these archetypical roles that we can tap into, because one of the roles of the priest is to imagine and to invite people into ritual. And so I love reclaiming in different ways the archetype of the priest or the priestess, or the shaman, to do that work. And so I wonder who are our emerging shamans. I've already called Kristen out, that I think she's an emerging shaman in our midst. But yeah, who else has got, Ariane, jump in.
Yeah, I have a question for the rest of you all. Something that I struggle with often when you're talking with people with ages, 12 to 17, end of middle school through high school age, is how to toe the line between really recognizing them as full people who really do have an idea of who they are and what they want and what they like and don't like, and validating that, and also showing them things that they might not think that they want, and helping to guide them, and knowing that sometimes that might mean doing things you don't want to do, and where that line is. And so when it comes, I'm thinking when we talk about nature, at 13, if you had said to me, you got to go, live in the woods and for a weekend, and you might get mosquito bites and it's going to be hot and you can't have your phone on you, I would not have wanted to do that. I would have complained a lot, and I would have ended up loving it, right? And I would have needed to be forced a little bit in a good way. But then there's a forcing, right, that's unhealthy, where you're actually not recognizing who the person is. And so I'm just curious how y'all have towed that line, and if you've found methods of knowing where the difference is between healthy encouragement and unhealthy encouragement.
Yeah, Claude, jump in there. That was a beautiful
I'd like
question.
to jump in on that. So I think you spoke about it, Ariane, and Japa talked about it, about the individualization of the rite. And I think it's really valuable to consider that we need to create ritual that acknowledges that we don't fit the child to the ritual, we fit the ritual to the child. And I'm using child kind of loosely here, before you have gone through the rite. And so the structure that we've played around with, in the Louisville Rites of Passage program, we've played around with different structures. And we've been at this now for 2 years, meeting weekly, a group of people discussing this thoughtfully. And so we have divided our passage program into stages. You first identify that you want to get on this path, but the path is mutable. You can, a person who enters into the Louisville Rites of Passage program has a whole bunch of different programs that they can participate in. So they choose the programs they want to participate in. Those programs are wrapped in these 4 domains of heritage, land, community, and self-determination, but they choose. And there's those are broad categories. And then once they have a passport for that, and once they take a certain number of programs in each of those domains, then they are eligible to step off of the path and take the journey. And the journey is a more intensive 2-month-long program that involves some of the more traditional passage opportunities, like a removal, where you go away from your community and you are in nature overnight, building fires, cooking food, having conversations about what it is like for them, what does it mean for them to become an adult, because that's different for every person. And then when they get to the end of that journey, there's a ceremony, and then the big and important piece of it is then on the shoulders of the community to say, I see you, not as a child, but as an adult member of this community that has a different set of responsibilities to us, and we have a different set of responsibilities to you. So that you can weave that path however you want to weave that path. And I love the language used, Ariane. You don't have a B mitzvah, you become a B mitzvah.
Somebody
wanna-
else jump in. A lot of good stuff here. Please just unmute.
I don't
Aaron?
want to.
Okay, Joppa and then Aaron.
Quickly, I don't want to take up too much. I want to jump in quickly on
Please.
that particular question, because as a teacher, I deal with that a lot in terms of how do you really, for instance, every year in the Waldorf school, you have a play. And that's a rite of transition for the children, being able to learn to participate in plays. Where you could have a lot of conflict around that. But the process of the transition ritual itself is also one of the things that prepares children to meet these things. If we only have like one transition in all of the childhood of a individual, then it's going to be a lot more difficult for them to meet that. But in a way, we have a play every year. So I went and observed a teacher recently. And I looked at what they were doing with the play, and in a way, it wasn't developmentally appropriate. And a lot of plays that children do are not developmentally appropriate. That's why they look bad. They look like little people trying to be adults. But if you understand and individualize it to the capacity of the age group, you really get this really beautiful expression. And I talked to her briefly about the adjustments you would make to encourage, to bring who the children are at this point to this transition. And she made these changes and the whole thing blossomed, and that's true each year in terms of what you're doing. There is this capacity to respect childhood, where no matter what age you're at, and you have to make the ritual speak to who the children are, that in terms of their emerging capacities. And then you'll see something wonderful. I mean, you ever get to go watch a bunch of Waldorf plays, you'll see the difference between them and most mainstream children in plays, because they're developmentally appropriate and speak and the capacity of the children emerge in this transition. So I think that's a point that I just want to make about that process of helping children meet these different challenges of transition that has to do with meeting their capacities as well as their individuality.
Thanks, Joppa. Aaron, did you have what's coming up for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think about that question of how do you know when to push, the question or the answer is relationship, right? Knowing your young people that you work with, and having adults as well who know them and know that moment of like, okay, they're ready for this. When I think about the development and the discipleship of our young people, there's kind of programs that come into play, and being willing to admit sometimes, like, I sent a student to a program that they weren't ready for. I thought they were, and they came back and I had to apologize and say, like, I'm really sorry. That's my fault, and taking ownership of that. But when it comes to the individual as well, what we've found within the Catholic faith is classroom model is great, but really individualization, kind of like you were saying with the B mitzvah, how do we tie into the gifts and talents that they've been given, and how do they then use them, which is the goal of confirmation, right? One of those things is integrating them fully within the community. Where are they feeling called to serve? Where are they connecting? What are their gifts and talents? We came up with a tool a couple of years ago. Schools have the IEPs, the individual excellence plans. So we came up with an ISP, which is an individual spiritual plan, where we would meet with our young people and we would say to them, okay, let's come up with 3 goals, just 3. It doesn't matter to me what they are, but let's talk about how you want to use your gifts and talents to get better. And it's not a judgment thing. We think of folks, we look at in terms of seekers, people who are just trying to figure it out, or trying to, figure out what they believe. Disciples, people who are learning, and then apostles who are sent back out into the world. And where are they? And it's okay wherever they are, But let's talk about some steps within that kind of area of how we can help you to grow. And it takes a lot of work. I mean, that's the hard part with young people, right? Is all the studies on the Christian side of things say that young people need 5 adults in their life who care about them to stay engaged and involved with their faith. 5 adults. Who were those people for you? And so it's that individualization and recognizing them for who they are, as opposed to just trying to get them through another sacrament or another grade or whatever, trying to figure out how to really plug in their gifts and talents.
Thank you. Yeah, Christine?
Some things that came up with for me were, and within our planning process over the past couple of years has been, we understood adulthood to be ambiguous, and that we really believe that, not we really believe, we know no matter what, regardless if you go through this program or not, you're going to be an adult. At some point, God willing, you will become an adult, right? And so we shifted the way that we thought about the program to where, like Claude was saying, that they choose the experiences that they're ready for. And then it really, when we talk about that preparation, that's that preparation piece to where they'll come through this program. They've made all these great friends and they want to go on this journey together, right? They're ready. So it's an opportunity, from 13, you can't go on the journey till you're 16, but you can start preparing at 13. By the time you hit 16, we want there to be this desire in your heart, because that was my second piece, was that we look at it as our responsibility to you versus now you have to learn your responsibility to the community. There is a big piece, and I think that's a big piece missing within, across, everybody. We have to remember that, and I'm not saying that, I think that we all on this call do know that, but sometimes it can be easy to forget that we want to put the energy toward you're earning your adulthood, right? You got to do this, this, and this in order to become an adult. When in reality, they're going to become an adult regardless. And so what do we have to do in order to honor our children as they become adults? That's our responsibility. And then they're learning their responsibility to us. A lot of our rites of passage is really trying to put youth in direct and deep connection to their history, to the sense of place, to themselves. And it's not about exclusivity where, okay, now I am, like for me, I joined a sorority and that was a huge, that was my rites of passage. But I want for my children and for our people and all people, in the understanding that everybody will become an adult, there should not be, I have to wear these letters, I have to accept this God, I have to do this and that in order to become an adult, right? Because we're all going to be in this world together, right? We're all going to be in Louisville. And so the ones who don't go through the rites of passage, what does that mean? The ones who don't accept this faith, what does that mean? All of these things. I went to a Catholic high school. When somebody asked me where I went to school, I say presentation, and that means something in Louisville, right? And it shouldn't. Right. It shouldn't mean that. You shouldn't say, oh, well, that you speak clearly because of this and that, or you're more valuable because of this and that. And so it gets us back to this idea that everybody has an innate value you're born with. You can't tell me, I can't earn it. It's mine. And so it is my responsibility as an adult to remind and to give what is owned by these teens, give it to them because it belongs to them. Right. And so I just thought that was just the most profound thing that was coming up for me as we were talking. One more thing is that one of my sisters told me that the strongest ceremonies are self-made. And that's always stayed with me, because a lot of times when we get into these rituals and religions, there's a lot of this pressure. You feel like, what if I light the wrong candle or wear the wrong color, or, and it's, what are you being called to? What do you need? Right. And allowing this energy kind of to move through you to find your path and find your people.
Kristen, thanks so much. Yeah, somebody else jump in.
Sorry, hey, this is Ben Freed.
Hey,
I'm a
Brandon.
rabbi
Welcome.
in town. Sorry, I'm not on. I came in from doing yard work and I look very silly. But I want to say I love what you just said, Kristen, about how do you make the ritual self-made. And I think so much of what of more traditional religious approaches to these rituals right now is exactly that, is how do we keep a structure of ritual that holds our tradition and give people room for self-expression and self co-creation within that. And I think that's what, that's what I'll say. I mean, I wouldn't say we're struggling with, but we're wrestling with right now in our synagogue, is how do we keep the traditional structure, because we believe that there's value in doing these rituals that we've been doing for thousands of years, and how do we create room for co-creation within that, and how do we have innovation and have things so that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. We don't just say, well, you can become an adult however you want to. And I know that's not what you were saying, but that's kind of what we are wrestling with right now. And I think we all wrestle with as people who, are trying to guide younger people and help be there for them and listen to them and hear what they need.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for those thoughts. This makes it, Kristen, you said a couple of things, and, as we're looking at this, cultivating a soul-centric city, I think the key element here is, does every child that's born in Louisville know they belong to us unconditionally? And so what ritual do we need to create as a city so that every child born in our borders that calls themselves a Louisvillian, they just know they belong to us. One of the late health person, I'm forgetting their name for the country, I don't know. He said that the biggest health crisis in the United States is that people don't belong. That the sense of not belonging creates all of these other health markers, negative health markers. And so that sense of what do we need, what rituals do we need so that everybody knows they belong at whatever stage of life they're in. Yeah, so that really hooked me. Yeah, Ariane.
Yeah, just piggybacking off of what Ben was saying, it makes me think of, with my preschoolers, if you want them to put your shoes on, their shoes on, not my shoes on. You don't say to them, do you want to put your shoes on right now? You say, do you want to put on your left shoe first or your right shoe first, right? That you give them choice, but within the framework of something that they have to complete. And so I think what we're trying to figure out is that not do you want to go through a ritual? That part has to happen, that we are asking that of them. But you don't have to put your right shoe on first, right? You can do your left, right? And so what is the ritual component of that? What is where is the piece of choice within a framework where we are asking something of them? And I think, Kristen, one of the things that really spoke to me about what you said was that we need to give them something also. We can't ask something of them. We can't ask them to contribute to the community if we haven't already showed them what the value of that is. And if they're not seeing what they gain by being part of that community, then the whole thing falls apart and doesn't make any sense. And I think that sort of ties into what Aaron was saying about, they have to have 5 adults that they have a relationship with, right? I think in Judaism, we don't have so much this idea of godparents, but I think that there's something to that, right? Of like having people, you don't just have your parents, you have your aunts and uncles, or you have your mom's best friend, or you have, right? Who are the people who are giving you different examples of where the value of this is in your life?
Yeah, this reminded me when I was I used to teach at the Detroit Waldorf School, and the 8th grade there. For me, the play in the Waldorf School every year is a ritual of transition, and so this was the 8th grade play. So this is the last year these students are going to be with this teacher, and he had decided they should do this play called "You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown," and they hated it, and so they took over the play, rewrote it to "You're a Dead Man, Charlie Brown." And they created this beautiful expression of the capacity they had developed over the years. And at that point, I was in training. So I decided that would always be the case for my last year with a group of students, that they would own it. It would be theirs, that I would have to be satisfied that the preparation I had done over the years would allow this to be the gift they could then give back. And it has always worked out. There's always been these beautiful gifts that they give back at the end of their time with the school. But it was in that case, when I saw it in Detroit, it wasn't the intention. They rebelled and they took hold of it and created this great expression that showed the maturation that they had over these series of transitions each year that they had went through and been guided through.
So we've got 15 minutes left. What I would love to hear, I want to give our panelists kind of some of the final word. So panelists, what in kind of a minute or so, minute, 2 minutes, kind of do a checkout for us. What have you heard that's been really meaningful or insightful to you? Like what's come up in your thinking? What are you taking away from our time together? Yeah, and I'll kind of go backwards. Ariane, if you would mind checking out. Thanks for being on the program today. Once again, would love to hear some of your final thoughts and words.
Yeah, I think I've learned so much from hearing from all of you. A lot of the things that we are trying to do and hoping to do, y'all are already doing. And that's great to know that it can work and it does work. And how, and to see some examples of that from all y'all. I'm thinking a lot in this conversation. I don't know if anyone's read The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker, but I cannot recommend it highly enough. She talks about, making sure we have a clear, I can put the link in the chat if that's helpful, but we have a clear purpose to every gathering we have. And that's not just, big ritual gatherings, but it's also like the dinner party you have with 5 people at your house. And really thinking about what am I hoping to achieve with this gathering, and then bringing that level of intentionality to everything you do. And so I'm thinking about her a lot in this conversation, and I'm just thinking a lot about like the immense beauty and value all of you are giving to these people. I feel like children is often a very belittling word. It shouldn't be, but it has that context, and so. I think you're all doing really amazing work in raising up the young people in our lives. And I hope to continue on the path that you are all setting for us. Oh,
Judd, you're
mute.
muted.
Look at there. All of this time and still can't get that one right. Thanks so much for being on. And yeah, I'm excited. Well, it's not my turn to check out, so I'll wait. Aaron, I think you were next. You mind checking out? Thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, happy to be with you all. Yeah, I think, for me, it doesn't matter whether it's a cultural thing or a faith, whatever perspective we're coming from. I think the conversation today reminds me of the work that Carol Powell's doing out with Fuller Youth Institute. She just put out a book, and I'm not paid by them, whatever. It's just a book I've enjoyed lately called The 3 Big Questions. And it seems like we're all wrestling with how do we recognize these questions, which are who am I, where do I fit, and what difference can I make? And for young people, those questions really help to shape who they are, how they interact with the world, and really kind of their journey. And so I think the conversation for me seems to be, whether it's culture or whatever, that first one, especially who am I, and where do I fit, what difference can I make? If we can all of us from our own perspectives help young people to figure those things out, that's a win in my book. That's what we're trying to do, right? So those kind of kept playing in the back of my mind listening to the conversation that we were having.
Thanks, Aaron. So excited to have you with the Archdiocese. Thanks for the good work you're doing, and look forward to working with you all more. Thanks for being on today. Claude, you've got words to check out. I do want to say, Claude, I appreciated you put this in the, I want to read this. You also talked, not only do we need to create rituals, but we need to destroy rituals. And I think that's a good, the destruction of false rituals or hurtful rituals that you've mentioned, including racism, sexism, and colonialism. Thanks for, yeah, the challenge to not only create new, but to critique rituals that aren't serving us or dividing us. So thanks. And you check out words from you, Claude. Thank you for being on, and look forward to working with Bernheim more.
Great. Well, we look forward to that too. I guess what's coming up for me is the realization that although we're talking about a passage from youth to adulthood, is that that's the start of the transitions. I'm transitioning now. I'm not as agile as I used to be. So I'm transitioning to a different way of moving in the world. And that one of the greatest gifts I think that we can give to our young people is that we can continue throughout our lives to transition gracefully and thoughtfully. And I'm always trying to learn how to do that. So it's a constant transition.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? Yeah. Stick around with the Soul-Centric City this year. We'll be going through all of these different life stages, and I'm in the midst of my own transition and wondering, yeah, who are my people? What are my rituals? And what's the path look like in that transition? Thanks, Claude. Kristen, final words, checkout from you. Thanks again for the work you're doing.
I think for me, kind of echoing what Claude said, is that, and we talked about it a little before too, but all of us need to be actively in community for this to work. We can't ask our children to do community service and get connected to the people in their community if there's not a real community to join. And so it's on us to be actively creating that and maintaining it. So I'm excited to get that book about gathering. I'm always looking for how do you create a deeper experience and connection with the people that are around you. So I'm super grateful. I've learned a lot today, and I'm thankful to be here.
Thanks, Kristen. So I really am inspired. Like, what would it look like if we were to create a rite of passage, maybe around 16 in Louisville? What would be ways in which we could invite young people who are choosing to drive and able to drive? What would be some collective citywide rituals, and how could we be intentional with those, and could they honor everybody's, maybe that's a grand vision, but there's something to that. And so maybe we could do a workshop. We'll bring all of us together and just imagine what that might look like to create something like that. We've got just a few minutes. Anybody else that's joined us on Zoom want to have a checkout moment to share what was meaningful or insightful to them? Feel free to unmute yourself and join in the conversation. Well, if that's the case, just deep bow to each of you. Thanks for being on and helping us create a soul-centric city. We've got another conversation. I think we're going to do the first week in June. We start looking at young adulthood. We're going to be looking at, here's some future commercials. One is we're going to be looking at a theory called faith development that was created by a guy named James Fowler back a while ago. He looked at how young people go through different stages of faithing. And that doesn't mean you have to be in a religious tradition. It's just whatever you put faith in, how developmentally that changes. And so we're going to look at that. We're also going to do a conversation on tattoos. And stories behind tattoos. There was a guy that wrote a book called Virtual Faith back a long time ago, and he was saying that modern culture, young people are tattooing themselves because culture and religion has failed to mark them, which is a powerful statement, like that we don't have these marking abilities. And so that young people mark themselves, like historically that they've done throughout many cultures, with tattoos that bring the inner outward. They bring the inner dynamic that the young person's going through, and they express it on their bodies with tattoos. So I'm going to do just listening to people tell stories about their tattoos as young adults. Join back in and listen to people talk about why they marked themselves and what the meaning is behind that as kind of a modern day rites of passage or ritual making. So stay tuned. Thank you all for being on. Deep bow to all of you. Keep up the good work. It does my heart well to know that our community is in such good hands with amazing creative people, and may we join together to create the kind of city that we all want. Thank you all for being on today. Peace and have a good day.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you all. You're welcome to unmute and do our goodbyes.